Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.
It's great to be here.
So I want to start today with a feeling that I think, well, I'm pretty sure everyone listening has felt it at some point, probably at 3 a.m. when you can't sleep.
Okay, I think I know where you're going with this.
It's that friction, right? That really uncomfortable friction between your brain and your heart. You know what I'm talking about.
The logic versus the emotion.
Yeah.
The head versus the gut.
Specifically when it comes to faith.
Mm.
Or spirituality. Or just meaning. We live in this hyper-scientific world. I mean, we have iPhones in our pockets that are more powerful than the computers that sent men to the moon.
Right. We have MRIs. We have the James Webb Telescope sending it back pictures from the beginning of time.
Our brains they're wired now for data, for proof, for show me the receipts. We demand evidence for everything.
We want the spreadsheet version of reality. If it can't be quantified, does it even exist?
Yes. But then there's this other part of us, the part that, wonders about meaning or feels something profound when you see a perfect sunset or just hopes there's something more going on.
And those two sides are usually at war. It feels like you have to pick a team.
You do. It feels like you have to choose.
Yeah.
You can be a rational, scientific, modern thinker, or you can be a person of faith. You can't be both.
The old idea that you have to check your brain at the door of the church or the temple or whatever spiritual space you're in.
Yes. And that is precisely why we're doing this deep dive today, because we found a guide, somebody who lived over a century ago, who looked at that choice and said, no, that is a false choice.
An absolutely false choice.
We are looking at a man who was, yes, a 19th century evangelist, but he was also a biologist, a lecturer in the natural sciences, a hard-nosed scientist.
Yeah.
And his name is Henry Drummond.
Henry Drummond is just such a fascinating figure. You have to remember the context. He's living and writing right in the middle of the Darwinian revolution. Science is exploding. And a lot of religious people were, frankly, terrified. They were running away from it.
They were trying to build a wall between faith and science.
But not Drummond. He was embracing it. He looked at the spiritual world and basically said, look, if God created this universe and this universe runs on dependable laws, then the spiritual world must run on laws too. It can't be the one lawless part of creation.
And that right there is the hook for our entire deep dive today. We were exploring that intersection of faith, skepticism, and natural law. We're going to take that old, scary, great detective version of God, the one in the clouds with a magnifying glass just waiting for you to mess up.
The cosmic policeman.
Yes, the cosmic policeman. And we're going to see if we can replace it with something that actually makes sense to a modern, skeptical mind.
And to do that, we're diving into his most famous works, The Greatest Thing in the World, that changed life, and I think most critically for our conversation, his address called Dealing with Doubt.
The mission for us, and for you listening, is simple. Can we find a practical, almost scientific method for spiritual life that respects the skeptic, that honors the honest intellect?
Can you have a deep spirituality without committing intellectual suicide? Drummond's answer is a resounding yes.
But he says you have to start by getting one thing straight. You have to stop treating religion like magic.
And that's the first big hurdle.
Okay, let's stop right there and unpack that. Treating religion like magic. This comes from his address, Pax Vobiscum, which means peace be with you. What does he actually mean by magic? Because I think a lot of people would say, well, hold on, isn't faith supposed to be about miracles?
But see, he makes a crucial distinction. There's a difference between the miraculous and the magical. For Drummond, magic it's lawlessness. It's getting something for nothing. He critiques what he calls the parasitic imagination.
Wow. That is a nasty phrase. A parasitic imagination. What is that?
It's brutal, but it's precise.
Yeah.
He says that most people, even very religious people, treat spiritual qualities, things like rest or joy or peace or love, as if they're atmospherics.
Like the weather.
Exactly. As if they're just things that float around in the ether, and if you get lucky or if you pray really, really hard, God just zaps them into your head.
It's like an app download. God, please install peace.exe onto my brain's hard drive.
Yes, and you wake up and boom, you're peaceful. It required nothing of you. Drummond's big question is this: does anything else in the entire universe work that way?
Well, no. I mean, if I want to be physically strong, I have to go to the gym and lift heavy things. There's no strength zap.
Right. And if you want to become a skilled pianist, you have to practice scales for hours and hours. If you want to be a doctor, you have to go to medical school.
Cause and effect. It's everywhere.
It is the fundamental law of the cosmos. But for some strange reason, when we enter the spiritual realm, We expect a total exemption from that law.
Yeah.
We want the result without the process.
He uses this metaphor here that I honestly love because it's so simple and mundane. It's the cake analogy.
It's brilliant in its simplicity.
Yeah.
He asks you to imagine a housewife who wants a cake. So she sits down in her kitchen and she prays, "Oh Lord, please give me a cake." She visualizes the cake. She writes, "I am a cake haver" on her mirror.
She manifests the cake.
She tries to manifest the cake. And what happens?
She starves.
She starves because you do not create a cake out of thin air. You don't conjure it. You take specific physical ingredients, flour, sugar, eggs, butter, and you subject them to specific unchangeable laws, the laws of chemistry and heat.
Cause and effect.
The cake is the effect. The mixing and the baking are the causes. Drummond's whole argument, his foundational claim, is that the spiritual world is exactly the same. It is a world of law, not magic. If you want rest, which is the cake in this scenario, you cannot just ask for it. You have to find the recipe, gather the ingredients, and follow the instructions.
You know, that's actually, it's incredibly empowering on one hand. But I have to be honest, it's also kind of annoying.
Annoying. Annoying.
Because it puts the work back on me. I kind of like the magic zap idea. I want to just ask for peace and get it delivered like an Amazon package. Drummond is saying, nope, get in the kitchen and start cracking eggs.
Exactly. We love the idea of magic because magic is effortless. But law requires labor. But here's the flip side, and this is what should appeal to the skeptic in all of us. Law is reliable. If it was magic, you'd never know if the zap would work today. It's arbitrary. But if it's chemistry, with absolute certainty, that if you follow the recipe correctly, you will get the cake every single time. He says the spiritual world is a methodical, not an accidental world.
Okay, so let's get into the recipe. Let's talk about rest. He breaks down a very famous quote from Jesus in the New Testament. "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest."
And most people stop reading right there. They hear that phrase, "give you rest," and they think, aha, see? It is a handout. It's a gift. He just gives it to you.
It's the magic zap.
It's the magic zap. But Drummond, the careful scientist, says, don't stop there. Read the next sentence.
The very next line is, "Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, and you shall find rest for your souls."
There it is.
So there's a giving part and a finding part. They're two different things.
Yes. Drummond argues that the giving part is Christ giving you the formula. He's handing you the recipe card. He's saying, here is how rest is produced. But the finding part, that's on you. That is a process of discovery. You don't find a buried treasure by sitting on your couch and wishing for it. You have to pick up a shovel and start digging. You have to engage in the process.
So if rest is the effect, the cake, what are the causes? What are the ingredients? Because if I'm feeling stressed out, anxious, burned out, which I think probably describes 90% of our listeners on any given day, what am I doing wrong? What ingredient am I missing?
Well, Drummond plays the role of a good doctor first. Before he writes a prescription, he makes a diagnosis. He asks, where does unrest actually come from?
My first answer would be my job, the deadlines, the news cycle, my kids, traffic.
And those are all real. But Drummond would say those are just the triggers. They're the irritants, but they aren't the root cause of the disease. He goes deeper. He says the root cause of unrest is self-love inflamed.
Oof, self-love inflamed. That sounds like a medical condition you'd see on a prescription drug commercial.
It really is a condition of the soul. He lists the symptoms, the causes of this inflammation, pride, selfishness, ambition, wounded vanity. Think about it. Think about the last time you were really, truly upset. Not just sad about a tragedy, but personally agitated, anxious.
Okay, yeah. It's usually because someone disrespected me at work, or I didn't get the credit for something I poured my heart into, or just, things didn't go my way. My plan got messed up.
Exactly. Every single one of those is wounded vanity. It's an inflamed ego. You had an expectation of how you should be treated or what you were owed, and reality failed to meet that expectation.
Yeah.
And the friction between your ego and reality is what we call unrest.
So the cure, the ingredients for the cake of rest, must be the direct opposite of those things.
Precisely. And this is where he brings in that strange ancient concept of the yoke.
Now, yoke, that's a word that immediately sounds negative to a modern ear. It sounds like a burden. It's farm equipment for slavery, right? Throw off the yoke of oppression.
That's how we use the word, and it's a common misconception. But Drummond, again, using his practical scientific mind, explains what a yoke actually was in a carpenter shop in that era. A yoke wasn't designed to be a burden. It was a piece of technology designed to make the burden light. It's a leverage device. An ox pulling a plow without a yoke would have a strap around its neck. When it pulls, the strap would choke it. The yoke is a carved piece of wood that rests on the strongest part of the animal's shoulders, distributing the weight evenly and allowing it to pull with maximum force and minimum strain.
So the yoke is actually a technology of ease. It's an ergonomic tool.
Yes, exactly. It's a tool that makes the work possible. And the ingredients carved into this specific yoke that Christ offers. For I am meek and lowly in heart.
Okay, stop. I have to push back here because this is where I think you lose a lot of modern people. Meekness, lowliness. They're terrible words for the modern ear. They're completely unmarketable.
Or career killers.
Totally. If I walk into a job interview and say, so tell me your biggest strengths, well, I'm extraordinarily meek and my lowliness is off the charts. I'm not getting that job. We value disruptors, assertiveness, being a killer. Meekness sounds like being a doormat. It sounds like weakness.
And that is how we use the word today. I agree. But that's not the mechanical function Drummond is describing. He's not talking about personality. He's talking about the physics of rest.
Okay, explain that. How does being a doormat give me rest? That sounds stressful.
It's not about being a doormat. It's about the complete absence of status anxiety. Remember the diagnosis. The cause of your pain is wounded vanity. It's the fact that you weren't praised enough or you were overlooked or you were insulted.
Right.
Well, meekness and lowliness are the direct antidote. If you are lowly, not in the sense of being worthless, but in the sense that you are genuinely content not being at the top, if you don't need the applause to function, can you be disappointed when it doesn't come?
Well, no, I suppose not. If
Yeah.
I don't have an expectation for applause, then I'm not hurt by the silence.
Exactly. You can't fall off the floor. If you have zero ambition to be seen as the greatest, you become immune to the pain of being treated as the least.
So it's not a weakness, it's a kind of a defensive strategy, an
Yeah.
immunity.
It's a peace strategy. It's a state of being unoffendable. Drummond says, and this is a direct quote, "The man who has no opinion of himself at all can never be hurt if others do not acknowledge him."
That's actually an incredibly logical statement. It's extreme, but it's logically sound. No ambition equals no disappointment.
And that's the science part of it. It's an equation. If you mix the ingredients of meekness and lowliness into your character, the inevitable chemical reaction, the end product, is rest. Imagine how peaceful your life would be if you were truly, genuinely unoffendable.
It would be a superpower.
It would be. And that's just one side of the equation. That's the defensive part. That leads us directly into his most famous work, The Greatest Thing in the World. Because if meekness is the defensive ingredient that gives us rest, there has to be an active, positive energy to this life.
Right, it can't all just be about not getting hurt.
And that energy, Drummond argues, is love. He starts this whole analysis by searching for the summum bonum, the supreme good, the one thing that, above all else, makes life worth living.
And historically, especially in certain religious circles, people have been told that the greatest thing is faith. Sola fide, right? Faith alone.
Just believe.
Yeah.
Have faith. It's presented as the pinnacle of spiritual attainment. But Drummond points out something fascinating. He says that the Apostle Paul, who is arguably the heavy hitter of Christian theology, the champion of faith, actually contrasts faith and love in his first letter to the Corinthians.
And he comes to a surprising conclusion.
He says that love is greater than faith. And Drummond asks why? Why would that be? Faith seems pretty central to the whole operation.
Yeah, it's the starting point for everything, isn't it?
It is. But Drummond's argument here is so clear and logical. He says love is greater than faith because the end is always greater than the means.
Unpack that for me. Faith is a means to an end.
Think about it this way. What is faith for? Why do you need faith?
Well, to connect with God, I suppose. To believe in something you can't see.
Exactly. Faith is the wire that connects your lamp to the power source. But is the wire the point? Or is the electricity the point? The Bible says God is love. So faith is just the connecting link. Love is the power itself. Love is the very nature of God.
So focusing only on faith is it's like collecting miles and miles of copper wire, but never actually plugging anything in to turn on the light.
Precisely. You don't want the wire. You want the current that flows through it. And Drummond goes even further. He says, love is the fulfilling of the law.
This is a great point he makes. He suggests that if you actually have love, you don't really need a list of rules anymore.
Think about it. If you truly deeply love your neighbor, do you need a law that says, thou shalt not steal from him?
No, of course not. The thought wouldn't even cross my mind.
Do you need a commandment that says, do not murder him or do not lie about him?
No, that would be inconceivable.
So love makes the Ten Commandments obsolete, not because you're a lawbreaker, but because you fulfill their spirit unconsciously. It's the ultimate efficient software for human behavior. It simplifies everything down to one principle.
Okay, now here's the part that I found so powerful. He takes this concept of love, which for most of us is very abstract and, a bit of a warm, fuzzy feeling, and he does something a scientist would do. He puts it through a prism.
The spectrum of love, this is Drummond the biologist at work again, he's analyzing the specimen. Just as ordinary white light, when it passes through a prism, breaks down into its component colors. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet.
The colors of the rainbow.
Yes. Drummond says the Apostle Paul does the same thing. He passes love through the prism of his intellect, and it breaks down into 9 distinct, observable ingredients.
And I want to walk through these because some of them are really surprising. They're not just feelings, they're concrete actions.
They are behavioral requirements, they're measurable.
The first one is patience. He calls it love passive.
Love waiting to begin. It's the engine idling, ready to go. And just think about how incredibly hard that is in our modern world. When you're stuck in traffic, or your internet connection is slow, or your kids are taking an eternity to put on their shoes.
Oh, I lose my mind. I'm tapping my foot, I'm checking my watch, I'm sighing dramatically.
And Drummond would gently say that in that moment, that is a failure of love. Because you are prioritizing your personal schedule and your efficiency over the reality of the other person or the situation. Patience is the conscious decision to inhabit someone else's timeline for a moment.
Wow. Okay, next is kindness. He calls it love active.
This is love actually getting up and doing something. It's not just feeling sympathy. It's making a meal for the sick neighbor. It's the action.
Then generosity, which he defines as love not envying.
This one is a killer for anyone with a competitive streak. Can you be genuinely, truly happy when your colleague gets the promotion you wanted, or when your rival succeeds? If there's a sting of envy in your heart, Drummond says, you don't have this ingredient of love.
That's tough. Next is humility, love hiding itself.
Love that does something kind and then doesn't post about it on social media. It doesn't need the credit.
Now this one really tripped me up at first. Courtesy.
Love in society.
I mean, come on. Since when is holding a door open for someone a profound spiritual act? It just feels like good manners, etiquette.
And Drummond takes a surprisingly hard stance here. He says manners are love in little things. He argues that for every one time in your life, you are called upon to perform some giant heroic act of love, like, taking a bullet for someone.
Which, let's be honest, for most of us will probably never happen.
Exactly. But you are called upon 10,000 times a day to just not be rude, to say please, to not interrupt someone when they're speaking, to treat the waiter or the cashier with dignity and respect. He argues that the cumulative weight of daily courtesy actually does more for the total happiness of the world than the one-off grand heroic gestures.
That's incredibly convicting. It means I can't be some great spiritual leader if I'm a jerk to the barista who gets my coffee order wrong.
You cannot. According to Drummond, it is a contradiction in terms. The small things reveal the true nature of the heart.
Okay, so then we have unselfishness, which is seeking the good of others, guilelessness, which is thinking no evil, and sincerity, rejoicing in the truth. But the one that stood out to me, and Drummond spends a huge amount of time on this, is good temper.
Yes. Love is not easily provoked.
He calls bad temper the vice of the virtuous.
And this is one of Drummond's most scathing and insightful critiques. He points out that we often make excuses for bad temper, especially in people we otherwise consider good or religious. We say things like, oh, he has a good heart, he just has a bit of a short fuse, or it's just a family failing, the Joneses are all a bit hot-headed.
Right, we treat it like a personality quirk.
Yet Drummond isn't buying that for a second. He says bad temper is like an intermittent fever that speaks of an unintermittent disease within. It's a symptom, a flashing red light on the dashboard, that the engine of the heart is not right.
He really goes after it. He says it probably causes more misery in the world than outright drunkenness or embezzlement.
Think about that claim. It's huge. Embezzlement hurts a company's bottom line. Drunkenness primarily hurts the drinker and their immediate family. But bad temper. A single person's bad temper can poison an entire office. It can destroy a home. It creates an atmosphere of constantly walking on eggshells. He says it withers up the men and women who have to live with it.
He uses the story of the prodigal son here, but he flips the camera in a way.
He does. He completely ignores the prodigal, the son who went off and wasted his inheritance. He focuses on the elder brother, The one who stayed home, the responsible one, the one who did his duty every single day.
The good one.
The good one. But when the younger wayward brother came back and the father threw a party, the elder brother stood outside the house, pouting. He was angry. He was jealous. He was sullen.
And Drummond suggests that in that moment, the elder brother was actually in a worse spiritual state than the prodigal.
Yes, because the prodigal's sins were sins of the body, partying, lust, wasting money. But the elder brother had a sin of the disposition. And Drummond suggests that sins of the disposition, touchiness, sullenness, bad temper, irritability, are perhaps even more offensive to a God who is love because they directly destroy the fabric of community and love. You cannot claim to be a loving person if you are constantly touchy. It's a chemical impossibility.
Wow, that really hits home. It forces you to look at your own daily irritability not as a minor quirk, but as a serious spiritual flaw.
A fatal flaw in the machinery of love.
So we have this incredible analysis of love, but then he goes on to defend it. Why is love the greatest thing? Why not knowledge? Why not truth? Why not faith?
He goes back to a scientific worldview. He essentially makes an argument from survival of the fittest. He says love is the greatest because it is the only thing that lasts.
He quotes Paul. Prophecies will fail, tongues will cease, knowledge will vanish away.
Let's just focus on that last one. Knowledge will vanish away. Think about the cutting-edge scientific knowledge of 100 years ago. Drummond tells this amazing true story about Sir James Simpson, the man who discovered chloroform, a giant of 19th century medical science.
A legend in his field.
An absolute legend. Years after he died, his successor at the University of Edinburgh was asked by the librarian to go through the medical library and pick out the books on his subject that were no longer needed to clear out space. And the professor said, take every single textbook that is more than 10 years old and put it down in the cellar.
Wow, knowledge has a shelf life, and it is brutally short.
Brutally short. Sir Isaac Newton, one of the greatest minds in human history, would fail a modern high school physics exam because we now know about quantum mechanics and relativity. The knowledge of the steam engine is passing away. But Drummond argues that the moral nature, the character built on love, is immortal. It is the only thing we build in this life that survives the transition of death because it is the nature of God himself, and we take it with us.
So if you want to invest your life's energy into something that won't end up in the cellar in 10 years, invest it in learning to love better.
Precisely. And this leads to a really provocative thought he puts forward. If God is love, then the primary way to know God isn't through theology. It's not through intellectual study. You can't truly know love by reading a textbook on human emotion. You know God by the act of loving. It's an experimental, practical knowledge.
Which brings us to the all-important question of how. How do we actually get there? Because it's one thing to sit here and say, be more loving, and it's a completely different thing to actually change a grumpy, selfish, irritable personality into a patient and kind one. This is from his address, The Changed Life.
And this is where Drummond the biologist really shines. He's not interested in nice sentiments. He's interested in the mechanics of growth. How do organisms actually change? How do you evolve from one state to another?
And true to form, he starts by listing all the ways that don't work. And I think every single person listening has tried these. He calls them the failed experiments.
First up, and this is the most common one, sheer willpower, the resolution method.
Okay, starting tomorrow, I resolve to be a better person. I will not lose my temper today, no matter what.
Drummond has this incredible image for this. He compares it to a drowning man in the middle of the ocean trying to pull himself up by his own hair. It is a physical impossibility. You cannot lift yourself by your own strength.
He has another great image here of a massive steamship, the Etruria.
Yes. He asks you to imagine you are on this huge transatlantic liner, and halfway across the ocean, the engines stop. The ship is just dead in the water, drifting. He asks, do you honestly think if all 3,000 passengers gathered on the deck and pushed with all their might against the mast, we could make the ship move forward?
It's an absurd image. The physics is completely wrong. You are part of the ship. You can't push the thing you are standing on to make it go.
But we do this spiritually all the time. We grit our teeth, we clench our fists, and we try to force our own character to change. I will be kind, I will be patient. Drummond says it doesn't work because the internal force is simply insufficient to move the massive weight of our own nature.
Okay, so that's failed experiment number one. Then there's the one-by-one method.
This is where you try to tackle one sin at a time.
Yeah.
Okay, this week, my only goal is to stop swearing. Or, this month, I'm working on my jealousy.
That sounds practical.
It does, but Drummond says it's like trying to dam up a powerful stream in just one place. What happens?
The water just overflows somewhere else, or it backs up and creates a swamp.
Exactly. You might stop swearing, but you become insufferably self-righteous and proud about it, so now you have a bigger problem. You can't patch a character one flaw at a time. You need a fundamentally new nature.
And the last failed experiment, which he hilariously calls the very young man's method, the diary.
This is the Benjamin Franklin method. You get a notebook, you draw a grid. Down the side, you list the virtues: temper, chastity, humility. And every night before bed, you give yourself a check mark or a black mark for your performance that day.
I have to admit, I have done this. It is a miserable experience.
It is utterly miserable. And Drummond is gentle here. He says it's earnest and shows you're serious, but he says it ultimately fails. And why? Because it focuses all of your attention on yourself. You spend the entire day navel-gazing, monitoring your own symptoms. It makes you self-conscious, not holy. You become obsessed with the disease, not the cure.
So if pushing the mass doesn't work, and damming the stream doesn't work, and the diary doesn't work, what is the true formula for change?
Drummond points to a subtle but profound grammatical point in the New Testament. The verb used for spiritual transformation is almost always passive. We are changed. Be ye transformed. We don't change ourselves. We are being changed by an external force.
So we are the clay, not the potter.
Right, but we do have a crucial role to play. And here comes what is maybe his most famous analogy. It's an optical one: the mirror.
We all, with unveiled face, reflecting as a mirror the glory of the Lord, are transformed into the same image.
Drummond explains this using what he calls the law of assimilation, or the law of influence. And the law is this: we become like those we habitually reflect.
That reminds so much of that modern saying that you hear in business circles. You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
That is 100% Drummond's point. He was writing this in the 1880s, but he was describing with perfect accuracy what we now know about mirror neurons and the science of social contagion.
Mirror neurons. Can you explain that briefly?
Sure. It's a fascinating area of neuroscience. Our brains are literally wired to mimic or reflect what we see in others. If I smile at you, the part of your brain responsible for smiling involuntarily fires up, even if you don't actually smile. If I look angry and tense, you instinctively tense up in response. We are biologically designed to absorb and reflect our social environment.
So when Drummond says we are changed by what we look at, he's being literally scientifically accurate. We are constantly downloading the personality files of the people around us.
Exactly. He uses the beautiful, homespun example of an old married couple. You see two people who have lived together for 50 years, and they start to look alike. They use the same phrases. They finish each other's sentences. They even have similar facial expressions. Why? Because for half a century, they have been a pair of mirrors, constantly reflecting each other.
So the practical application for spiritual change is, if you want to become like Christ, if you want to have that love nature we talked about, you don't struggle. You don't try harder. You don't push the mask. You just stand in front of the mirror.
You stand in the light. You spend time in the presence of that character. He used another analogy: photography. The soul, he says, is like a sensitive photographic plate. To get an image on the plate, you must expose it to the subject. If you expose that sensitive plate to a dark, ugly scene, that is the image that will be burned into it. If you expose it to a beautiful landscape, it becomes the landscape.
Yeah. And if you expose your soul, your mind, your attention to the character of Christ, through reading about him, through what Drummond simply calls friendship with him, you are chemically, inevitably changed into that same image.
That's the formula.
So willpower does have a place, but its place isn't to change the image itself.
No. Willpower is the muscular effort required to hold the mirror steady and in the right position. It's like an astronomer adjusting a telescope. The astronomer has to use will and effort to keep the telescope pointed directly at the star while the Earth is spinning. The telescope doesn't create the starlight. It just holds the gaze so the light can come in. Our job, our work, is to keep our attention fixed on the thing that has the power to change us.
You know, that is such a profound relief. It takes all the pressure off of trying so hard to be good, and it shifts the focus to just staying connected.
It shifts the goal from manufacturing virtue to catching virtue, like a contagion. You catch it from being around the source.
Now, this brings us to the section that I know we both wanted to spend some real quality time on, because everything we've just said sounds great if you're already on board, if you're already a believer.
Right. It works if you accept the premise.
But what if you don't? What if you're the skeptic? What if you're listening to all this and thinking, this is just a collection of nice fairy tales and clever analogies?
This is where we get into his address, dealing with doubt. And this is, in my personal opinion, one of the most important and compassionate things Drummond ever wrote, because he completely flips the script on how religious people usually treat atheism or honest doubt.
He starts by validating the doubter, by praising them
He
almost.
does. He opens with this bombshell of a statement. He says, the doubters are often the best men in the community.
That is a shocking thing for a famous evangelist to say, especially back then. Usually the doubters are the villains of the story, the ones you have to defeat in an argument.
Not for Drummond. He says the doubters are the people with intellectual integrity. They are the ones who refuse to just swallow a tradition because their grandmother believed it. They want to know if it's actually true. And Drummond points out that Christ loved that kind of person. He consistently preferred the outsiders, the tax collectors, and the sinners who knew they didn't have it all figured out to the Orthodox Pharisees who were smugly certain they knew everything.
So in his view, where does doubt come from? Why is it such an inevitable part of the human experience?
And Drummond lists 4 reasons, and they're all incredibly compassionate. First, he says, we are born questioners. A small child's first and most constant word is why. It is our nature to question. It's not a sin, it's a faculty.
Okay, that makes sense.
Second, the world is a sphinx. It's a riddle. It's a confusing, often contradictory place. It doesn't present a simple, clear-cut case for a benevolent God.
It really doesn't. Bad things happen to good people all the time. The world is full of suffering.
Third, he says our instrument for perceiving truth, the human mind, is itself impaired. It's not a perfect objective tool. It's full of biases, prejudices, and limitations. And fourth, and this is crucial, all religious truths are inherently doubtable.
What does he mean by that? That they're not true?
No, not at all. He means that you cannot prove the existence of God with the same kind of certainty as a mathematical equation like 2 + 2 = 4. If you could prove God with pure, undeniable logic, it wouldn't require faith. It would be sight. It would be a coercive fact, not a relationship. God, in his view, deliberately leaves room for the choice.
So he's admitting right up front that there is no single, absolute logical proof that can shut down all possible arguments against belief.
Exactly. He's conceding that ground to the skeptic immediately. And because of that, he says this profound thing, heresy is truth in the making, and doubt is the prelude of knowledge.
Doubt is the prelude of knowledge. That completely rebrands the entire experience. Doubt isn't a sin to be ashamed of. It's a necessary growing pain.
It's the friction of a mind honestly engaging with reality. It's the first step toward a faith that is actually your own, not one you just inherited.
But the church, historically, has not always seen it that way.
No. And Drummond is blunt about this. He contrasts the church's historical method for dealing with doubt with Christ's method. The church's method, for centuries, has been burn him or brand him.
Cancel culture, 19th century style.
It is social ostracism. If you express doubt, you are labeled as bad, you are seen as dangerous, you are excommunicated. But Christ's method, Drummond says, was simply teach him.
He brings up the classic case of Thomas, doubting Thomas.
Thomas is the patron saint of the modern skeptic. After the resurrection, all the other disciples are saying, we've seen him, he's alive. And Thomas says, look, I'm not going to believe this based on your secondhand testimony. Unless I can see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were, I will not believe.
He was a scientist. He wanted empirical data.
He did. Now, Christ could have come back and said, Thomas, you have a wicked, unbelieving heart. Everyone else believed. Get out.
But he didn't do that.
No. He met Thomas exactly where he was. He appeared to him and said, reach hither thy finger, and behold my hands, and reach hither thy hand, and thrust it into my side. He offered facts. He offered evidence. Drummond argues that the true scientific spirit of Christianity is to base faith on evidence, not on blind tradition. Christ didn't ask Thomas to suppress his intellect. He gave him the data he needed to satisfy it.
So based on that, how does Drummond advise we deal with skeptics in our own lives? Or maybe more importantly, how do we deal with our own internal skepticism?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of us listening are the skeptic in this story.
He lays out a very clear, practical protocol, a method. Step 1, make concessions.
What kind of concessions are we talking about?
Be the first to admit that the church, as an institution, has often failed miserably. Admit that Christians are frequently terrible hypocrites. Admit that our creeds and doctrines are just human versions of the truth. They are maps, not the territory itself. They are flawed and incomplete.
That takes all the wind out of the sails of a combative argument immediately. If I come at you and say, look at how terrible Christians have been throughout history, and your response is, I know, isn't it awful? It breaks my heart. well, we're suddenly on the same side of the table.
Exactly. You validate their perception of reality
Yeah.
because their perception is often correct. You don't try to defend the indefensible. You join them in their critique.
Okay, so that's step one. What's step two?
Shelve the insoluble.
I really like this one.
It's so practical. He says, don't get bogged down trying to solve the great, unanswerable theological mysteries right at the start. Don't try to solve the problem of the Trinity or the origin of evil or the paradox of free will and predestination. Just put them on a shelf for now.
He compares it to a mathematician who comes across an equation he can't solve.
Right. Does that mathematician throw up his hands and quit mathematics forever?
No, of course not. That would be insane.
He makes a note of the unsolved problem, sets that specific equation aside on a shelf, and he goes on to work on the thousands of other problems that can be solved. He doesn't let the one unknown variable invalidate the entire discipline.
So stop banging your head against the wall on the same handful of questions that no one has definitively figured out for 2,000 years.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Focus on what is solvable, which leads directly to step 3, which is the crucial pivot. Turn to the moral and the practical.
This is where he has that line, the good is the enemy of the best.
Yes. He argues that very often people use these insoluble intellectual puzzles as a sophisticated excuse to avoid practical moral action. We say, well, I can't really commit to serving the poor or being a better person because I haven't yet figured out how Jonah could have survived inside a giant fish.
That's a very convenient, high-minded excuse for doing nothing.
It is. So Drummond says, forget about the whale for a minute. Let's talk about right now. What are you doing with your one and only life? And this is where he says, obedience is the organ of knowledge.
Obedience is the organ of knowledge. That is a profound epistemological claim. That's a theory of how we know things.
It is. He's arguing that spiritual truth is not something you learn primarily by thinking. It's something you learn by doing. If you want to know if the teachings of Jesus are true, don't just sit in your armchair and analyze them philosophically. Enter the laboratory of your own life and run the experiment. Try living that way for a month and see what happens.
So he challenges the doubter to serve, to act.
Exactly. He says to the skeptic, okay, you don't believe in God, fine. Let's put God on the shelf for a moment. But do you believe in helping that starving child on the corner? Do you believe in being a person of integrity in your business dealings? Do you believe in fighting for justice for the oppressed?
And if they say yes to those things,
Then Drummond says they are already living inside the kingdom of God, whether they know the name of the king or not. They are doing the truth. And he has this deep conviction that if you just follow the track of moral obedience, if you commit yourself fully to just doing the next right thing over and over, that path eventually leads you to the source of all rightness. The action precedes the understanding.
it reminds me of that powerful anecdote he tells about the ultimate apologetic, the ultimate defense of faith. Someone asks him, why do you believe in miracles?
And he doesn't launch into a big argument about the Red Sea parting or water being turned into wine. He says, because I saw one yesterday.
I saw a drunkard redeemed.
That, for Drummond, is the one piece of empirical, observable data that breaks the cold logic of atheism. You can argue against a philosophy, you can poke holes into theology, you can deconstruct an ancient text. But you cannot argue against a genuinely transformed life.
It's undeniable. If a man was a complete wreck, abusive, addicted, selfish, hopeless, and now, a year later, he is a pillar of love and service in his community, and when you ask him what happened, he says, Christ did this, you can call him deluded if you want, but you cannot deny the observable change. The data is the data.
It's the data of God. It's the evidence.
This all leads us to really trying to define what this God concept even is. Because I think a lot of atheism, and I've certainly felt this myself, is not really a rejection of God. It's a rejection of a bad definition of God.
Drummond is completely open about this. He shares his own childhood experience. He says he grew up absolutely terrified of God.
He talks about God as the great detective.
Yes, he said he had an illustrated book of hymns by Isaac Watts, and on one page, the concept of God was represented by a giant, single, piercing eye floating in the middle of a black thundercloud.
That is the stuff of childhood nightmares. It's the Eye of Sauron from Lord of the Rings.
It is. The great detective playing the spy on little children. The hymn said God was writing now the story of what little children do. Drummond says this is a terrible, pagan, monstrous idea that we have to utterly obliterate. And he says if that is your God, you should be an atheist. He would be an atheist too.
So what's the better definition? How does Drummond correct that terrifying image?
He moves away from the God who is out there and toward the concepts of Emmanuel, which means God with us. Not an absentee landlord who checks in once a year, not a policeman in the sky, but an internal intuition, a presence that is woven into the very fabric of your life and consciousness.
He tells that beautiful, almost heartbreaking story about Helen Keller here.
It's so touching. Helen Keller, as most of us know, was left deaf, dumb, and blind by an illness in her infancy. She lived in a dark, silent world, completely cut off, until her teacher, Anne Sullivan, taught her to communicate through touch. When she was about 12, the famous preacher Phillips Brooks came to visit and began to tell her, through her teacher, about God, about this great being of love who created her and cared for her.
And her response wasn't confusion or surprise.
No, she spelled out on her teacher's hand, "I knew all that before, but I didn't know his name."
That gives me chills every time I read it. I knew all that before.
It suggests that the experience of God, that sense of a benevolent presence, a love that was with her even in the darkness and the silence, was already there, intuitively. Theology just gave it a label. And this aligns perfectly with Drummond's view that the kingdom of God isn't a place you go to when you die. It's not a GPS location.
This is what he calls the geography of the kingdom.
Right. In his address to boys called first, he asks them, "Where's the kingdom of God?" And he says it's not in heaven, it's not even in the Bible, it is within you.
He uses that great analogy of the British soldier standing in Canada.
Yes. A British soldier is stationed by the Niagara River. Physically, he is thousands of miles away from the island of England. But, Drummond asks, is he in the Kingdom of England? Of course he is. Why? Because his heart is loyal to the Queen. He carries the authority and the reality of the kingdom with him wherever he goes.
So if you carry the kingdom within you, what is the arithmetic of it? How does the math work?
The math is simple and absolute. Seek first the kingdom of God.
Not second, not third, first.
First. And here Drummond warns against what he calls the fallacy of subtraction. He says this is another huge reason people reject faith. People think religion is all about subtraction.
Giving things up. You know, if I become a serious Christian, I can't have fun anymore. I can't go to parties. I can't play baseball on Sunday. I have to become a miserable little old man.
Drummond says that is absolute nonsense. True religion is never about subtraction. It's always about addition. The promise is, all these things shall be added unto you. He says when you find something truly better, the old, lesser things just drop off naturally because you don't want them anymore.
It's just natural growth.
It is. A grown man doesn't stop playing with a little spinning top because there's a law against it. He stops because he's a man now, and he's more interested in a newspaper or his business or his family. He has outgrown it. You don't subtract the toy, you add something bigger and better that makes the toy irrelevant.
He tells a story here that I think captures this whole idea of seeking first and the principle of addition so perfectly. It feels like a parable. The story of the boy with the 40 gold dinars.
It feels like something straight out of the Arabian Nights. A young Persian boy is leaving his home to go to the great city of Baghdad to study. It's a dangerous journey. His widowed mother sews 40 gold dinars into the lining of his coat. This is his entire life savings.
And as he leaves, she gives him 2 simple instructions.
Fear God and never ever tell a lie.
So he sets off with the caravan, and inevitably, because it's a story, he sees a cloud of dust on the horizon. Robbers.
The robbers descend on the caravan. One of them grabs this young boy and asks roughly, "Boy, what do you have?" And the boy looks the robber right in the eye and says with perfect calmness, "I have 40 gold dinars sewn in my coat."
And the robber just laughs at him. He thinks the boy is being a smart aleck. "Yeah, right, kid. Good one." And he shoves him aside and rides off.
A second robber comes up, asks the same question. The boy gives the exact same answer. "I have 40 gold dinars." He doesn't believe him either. Who would be foolish enough to admit that? Finally, the robber captain himself comes over. "Boy, what do you have?" "I have 40 gars sewn into the lining of my coat."
And the captain decides to call his bluff. He takes out his knife, rips the coat open, and there they are. The gold coins tumble out onto the sand.
The captain is absolutely stunned. He looks at the boy and asks, "Why on earth did you tell me? You could have saved all your money. You could have just lied."
And the boy says, "Because of God and my mother. I promised my mother I would never tell a lie."
And here's where the addition happens.
The robber captain is just. He's struck to the heart. He looks at this small boy who is so faithful to his God and to his mother's simple command that he would risk his entire fortune. And the captain is overcome with shame at his own life. He realizes how small and cowardly he is in comparison.
He says, "I have been a coward." He takes the boy's hand. The story goes that he reforms his life, he gives up his thievery, he becomes an honest merchant, and he takes the boy on as his business partner.
The boy sought first the kingdom of God, in his case, simple righteousness and truthfulness, and the added part was that he not only kept his life, but gained a future, a fortune, and transformed a man's soul.
It's a perfect parable of influence. The boy's moral reality, his truthfulness, had a power that chemically changed the environment around him. In Drummond's language, the boy reflected the glory of truth, and the robber was changed into that same image just by being exposed to it.
So, after all of this, what does this all mean for us today, living in our world? We've covered a massive amount of ground. We've looked at the science of the spirit, the idea that peace isn't magic, it's the result of specific, knowable causes.
We've analyzed the data of God, that love isn't just a sentiment, it's the supreme, indestructible energy of the universe, and the only thing that ultimately lasts.
We've examined the mechanics of change, that we are mirrors, not sculptors, and we become like what we consistently look at.
And we've taken a deep dive into doubt, reframing it, not as a sin to be punished, but as an honest demand for a reality, for facts, for a faith that actually works in the real world.
It really is a framework for faith that doesn't demand you turn off your brain at the door.
That's the core of it all. Drummond is making the case that the spiritual world is just as real, just as lawful, and just as testable as the physical world. And you can run the experiments yourself in the laboratory of your own life.
And that leads to that final thought he has about the final test.
Yes. Drummond suggests that at the end of the day, or perhaps at the end of all our days, the ultimate test of our religion isn't our religiousness. It's not how many church services we attended, or which creed we signed, or what theological arguments we won. The final test is simply love.
How have I loved?
Exactly. And to the skeptic, to the person who is still listening and isn't sure, he offers this final provocative challenge. If the instrument of truth, your mind, is impaired, and if you can't see God with a telescope or prove him in a syllogism, perhaps the only way left to verify the existence of God is through that laboratory we mentioned.
As Drummond says so powerfully, the best apologetic for Christianity is a Christian.
A life that has been demonstrably empirically changed for the better. That is the one argument, the one piece of data that cannot be refuted.
So whether you are a believer, a doubter, or just someone trying to figure out how to have a little more rest in the constant chaos of modern life, the invitation from Drummond is the same. Test the hypothesis, mix the ingredients, stand in the light.
And see what happens.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the mind and work of Henry Drummond. It's been a real pleasure unpacking all of this with you.
Likewise, it's been fantastic.
This has been Thinking Deeper by 6-7. We'll see you in the next Deep Dive.